My name is Hassan Vaisada. I'm the Deputy CEO of the Committee for Sydney, and it's really great to have you all join us for today's Global Insights webinar. Before I start the official proceedings, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon we meet, wherever you may be. Today, I'm on the land of the Camaragal people. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I would also like to recognise and thank our Innovation Fund partners here at the committee: Campbelltown City Council, Dexus, ICC Sydney, JLL, Lendlease, McKinsey & Company, UTS, and University of Sydney for their ongoing support of the work we do here at the committee. So today we're looking at the global trends of working from home, an issue that we've been looking at very closely for the last couple of years at the committee, as have pretty much every other organization and company around the world. Obviously, the last few years have profoundly changed how we work, how we interact with each other in our workplaces and at our communities as well. And that's really having some long-standing kind of implications on the knowledge economy as well. And today we're going to have some really great insights from around the world and here locally about where we stand on that. So, will we ever actually see a return to the 5 days in the office work week? These are some of the questions researchers at Stanford University, University of Chicago, and the Mexico Autonomous Institute of Technology, or ITAM, have been asking since May 2020, when they started the monthly survey of working arrangements and attitudes. So every month for the past 2 years, they have surveyed around 5,000 Americans on their views and experiences of working from home and whether it will stick. So in that time, they've amassed a lot of data. They've spoken with more than 120,000 people, which is phenomenal. Today, one of the co-designers and researchers, Assistant Professor Maria Barrero, joins us from Mexico to share the insights and trends emerging from their ongoing survey. We're very thankful for Jose joining us today. Assistant Professor Barrero is an applied economist with interests in macro, finance, and labor economics. In addition to remote work, he studies how businesses forecast the future and how they behave under uncertainty. And we have no more uncertain times than we have at the moment. After Jose's presentation, we will be joined by Sue Horlin, Managing Partner at PwC, and Jody Williams, Principal at CRTKL from Washington, DC, to dig a little bit deeper into the implications of this data and the kind of the real world in terms of workplaces overseas and here in Australia. I'll introduce Sue and Jody in more detail in the Q&A section, when we'll also have time for your questions. So please, in the meantime, submit them through the Q&A function so we can arrange to have them asked in the Q&A. But first, let's hear from Assistant Professor Barrero on the latest survey results.
Great. So thanks very much for having me. Let me just share my presentation. Here we go. So yeah, so I want to talk to you a little bit today about what the working from home outlook is looking at this point of 2022 and beyond. And yeah, so thanks very much for that introduction. I'm an assistant professor at ITAM, which is the Mexico Autonomous Institute of Technology here in Mexico City. So just to give you a little bit more background on where I'm coming from, where is my data from working from home? So with a group of collaborators, so Nick Bloom at Stanford University, Steve Davis at the University of Chicago, we've been running this monthly survey of 5,000, or actually in recent months, more individuals in the US who are working age. And we've been asking them basically how their attitudes and their behavior during the pandemic has been with respect to working from home. The three of us, also collaborate on an ongoing survey of 500 US firms per month, and actually also a cross-country survey. And I'm going to be drawing on all three of those and what I'm going to say. And just to give you an idea, kind of, we've created this website called wfhresearch.com, where we are compiling all of our research output and all of our data, and which has caught, a lot of interest in the academic literature, but also in the business and the finance press. So for example, I gave a presentation earlier this year, and which was featured in this article from The Economist back in January. So let me kind of get to the point working from home, at least in the US, looks like it's sticking. So before the pandemic, we estimate from a government survey that was run in 2017, 2018, that about 5% of all paid working days were being done from home. Obviously, during the pandemic, that spiked. So when we started collecting data over here in May of 2020, this was upwards of 60%, and it's drifted down as we've moved kind of through the pandemic and through the vaccine rollout towards a new normal. And in recent months, it looks like it's converging at about 30% of days of all paid working days. And if you think about it, this is basically a 6-fold jump from what we were seeing before the pandemic. And we see something very similar in our global survey. So this is a survey that has dozens of countries and is trying to use a similar methodology, kind of more or less everywhere in the world. People are working upwards of 1 day a week. I mean, there's some variation country to country, but it looks like there is kind of a global shift towards working from home to some degree around the world. So coming back to the US, kind of where do we see the labor force going? Basically, we see 3 groups of people. There's going to be some 55% or so of the population who are going to be fully on site. These are typically going to be in the US frontline employees who are mostly graduates, mostly lower paid. But then there's a population that can do their job from home, and they're going to be split up into 2 different groups. So there's going to be about 30% of the population in a hybrid working arrangement, which means that they're going to go into the workplace a couple of days a week, and they're going to stay home the rest of the week. Okay, and typically these are going to be professionals and managers, mostly university graduates and mostly higher paid. And so I think it'll become clear why I'm saying that these are mostly professionals and managers, because I think the jobs that these sorts of people are in typically require interaction with their coworkers, which is very fruitful. And so there's reasons to come into the office. There's going to be about 15% of the workforce, however, that is going to be fully remote. And we believe these are going to be mostly people in kind of very specialized roles that don't really need kind of interaction and collaboration. So people, for example, in a payroll department or in an IT support department, where it's very easy for them to be on site full time. Okay, and so when we think about hybrid work, which as you saw just now, so there's going to be about twice as much hybrid work as there's going to be fully remote work according to our data. Well, why is that? The reason is that it combines the benefits of both going to the office and staying at home. So when on days when you go to the office, this is typically good for creativity because you get to see your colleagues, you get to discuss, you get to develop a workplace culture. On the days when you stay home, you can actually focus and do kind of the sorts of individual tasks that require concentration, that require quiet, and also happens to save a lot of time from the commute. I live in Mexico City, so you can imagine what traffic is like in a city of 20 million people. And so, yeah, saving on the commute is a big deal in many places. So actually, yeah, the saved commute and plus the amount of time that you save in the morning from getting ready before going to work saves about 70 minutes a day. And about 40% of that goes into extra work. So actually, when we stay home, this basically makes your day a little bit more efficient because there's basically more minutes for you to be allocating to your job, and part of it goes to your job, part of it goes to your own leisure. So you see 40% of the time saved from commuting goes to working. The rest goes to other activities such as childcare, leisure, and so on. So basically, it's a win-win. The employer gets something, the employee gets something. And also, partly because of the time saved, actually our research, along with other pieces of research, find that hybrid working from home actually increases average productivity by around 5%, by a modest amount. And this is, and what I find a little bit more interesting is that actually this has been growing through the pandemic. So if you look at this chart on the left, this is showing for every survey date where we've asked this question, basically how much more efficient are you working from home relative to working on your business premises. In 2020, people said that they were more efficient at home. So all of these numbers are positive. But since the start of 2021, basically this has drifted upwards. right? So as the pandemic has gone on and we've had a chance to learn how to work from home effectively, we've become actually more efficient at doing it. And I think this is going to be one of the reasons that it sticks. That not only is it more effective now, not only is it more effective overall, but it's more effective now that we've been living through it for 2 years. And actually, there's a ton of research data that shows similar things. So when you do randomized control trials and you randomize a portion of a company's workforce to go into the office some days and not other days, versus a different portion of the workforce just goes to the office every day, the people who are in hybrid mode are actually more productive. And so one of my co-authors, Nick Bloom, has at least 2 studies that shows this, both among call center workers, but also among engineers and professionals. The other thing is we think working from home is going to stick because people like it. So employees value hybrid work. So when we ask them, how much do you value the option to work from home a couple of days a week, not necessarily the full week, basically everywhere we see that people value it as about 5% of their pay. So it's equivalent to a 5% raise. And we see this, as you can see, kind of even in our cross-country survey across countries that have many different cultures, practices, many different industry mixes, we see that people value working from home. And yeah, so this is a graph taken from one of the studies by my co-author Nick Bloom over here. You can follow him on Twitter. He posts lots and lots of our results regularly. But basically, when you look at a company and you randomize some of its engineers and professionals into hybrid work and some of them into just coming into the office, well, it turns out the people who so quit rates go down. You see quit rates here for the fully in-person group are higher than for the hybrid work group, but also productivity actually goes up in the hybrid work group. And indeed, when we ask people, basically, what are the top 3 benefits of working from home, it's very clear that among the top 3 benefits, the one that is most often cited is, you know what, I save time from my day because I don't have to commute to the office in the morning and then come back in the afternoon. Those 40 minutes to an hour that I used to spend commuting, now I can spend on a myriad of different things and basically organize my day better and be more relaxed. And this is kind of what the main reason people like it. It also happens that hybrid work is good for diversity. And so we see this in several different ways, but basically when we look in the US at women versus men, it turns out women want to work from home more often than men do, but they want to work, see this is in number of days per week, they want to work 2.4 days per week, men only want 2.2 days. But if you look at what employers are offering them, actually women say that their employer is offering them less work from home. Those are the red bars, 1.2 days a week relative to 1.4 days a week for men. We see a similar story when we look at, say, minority groups in the US relative to whites. These minority groups typically say they want to work from home more often. And so allowing for working from home is allowing some of these more marginalized groups in the labor force basically to be able to feel comfortable in your company. And it's probably a good idea if you're trying to recruit a diverse workforce. If you don't offer any working from home, you basically might be implicitly turning away some of these groups. So yeah, not surprisingly, employers are increasingly shifting to hybrid. So what this chart is showing you is the average number of days per week that employees say their employer is planning for them to work from home after the pandemic. Okay, so at the beginning of the pandemic, employees said, look, my employer is planning for me to work from home about 1.5 days a week. But then something clearly happens at the beginning of 2021, and these plans start to change. And they start increase. And basically in recent months, it's upwards of 2.3 days a week. So for the typical person who can work from home, now their employer in the US is saying, you're going to get to do it half of the time. Okay, so about 2 to 3 days a week. And most of the shift actually is coming from employers basically going earlier in the pandemic from a camp where they were like, yeah, I'm not sure what we're going to do after the pandemic, to saying, you know what, hybrid work kind of works, and so we're happy to offer some hybrid work to you, and that's basically what's responsible for this rise. Okay. And yeah, in the US, it looks like we're now close to the post-pandemic norm. So this is a chart from some great data that is actually not from our surveys. It's coming from Castle Security, which is a company that basically manages security at big office buildings. And so looking at the use of key cards at the entrances of the office buildings, they can figure out how much people are actually going into these big office buildings in big city centers. And you see kind of this building occupancy is basically sputtering at around 40%. And it looks like it's converging and stabilizing at that level relative to other activities in the economy, like going to restaurants, like, so TSA checkpoints is security at airports, going to NBA basketball games. It looks like working from home, at least for people who work in these big office buildings, is stabilizing, which is very consistent with the data that I've shown you. Okay, the challenge in a world of hybrid work is, how do you manage a workforce where some days the employees are in the office, some days they're not? And in particular, kind of how do you decide how many days and which days people are supposed to come into the office? And part of this issue is that coordination is really tricky. It turns out that when you ask employees, basically, do you want to be in the office when your colleagues are in the office? And when you ask them, do you want to be able to choose which days you come into the office? They say yes to both questions, but this is kind of a paradox, right? Because you either coordinate with people, or you get to choose freely what you do. And so this is why managing a hybrid workforce is in practice so difficult. And I mean, additionally, it also happens that what employees want is very diverse. And actually, the two most popular options for how much people want to go into the office is rarely or never, or always. Okay, so basically, if you're an employer and you're trying to move to a world of hybrid work, you're catering essentially to a minority. It's a middle of the road approach, but it's sort of an approach that isn't particularly popular, and so that makes it difficult to manage. Okay. Having said that, with my colleagues, we are also concerned about the risks of full employee choice. And the reason is, again, because if there's certain groups of the population, say women or minorities, or a certain type of employee who is allowed not to come into the office because you have full choice, and then they don't show up to the office, and then they don't get as much face time with their manager as other people and don't get promoted, this can get into a very risky situation. So I mean, that's one reason why we're skeptical of full employee choice. We also think that basically, if you're going to have a hybrid workforce, coordination is quite important. And so here's the one expression of that. So when we ask people what are some of the top 3 benefits of working on your employer's premises, basically the top 2 things are face-to-face collaboration and socializing. So basically, I want to go into the office to see my colleagues, talk to them, collaborate with them. There's a lot of chatter in the US about basically companies offering their employees free bagels if they come in New York City and that sort of thing. Well, that's all very nice, but I think at the end of the day, when people want to go to the office, they want to go because they want to see their colleagues, they want to collaborate in person. It's not because they're getting free bagels. Okay, and so actually, what are companies doing? So this chart is coming from our survey of 500 firms a month. When we ask companies basically who decides which days and how many days work remotely, and we look at large enterprises, typically those large enterprises are not allowing employees to choose. So they're not taking a decentralized approach. They're saying, look, either teams are going to decide which days you come into the office in order to coordinate, or the whole company is going to have the same thing. So, and given what I've said about coordination, I don't think that's particularly surprising. If you do this at the organization level, it turns out that the 2 most popular days a week that people want to work from home are, perhaps not very surprisingly, Monday and Friday, so that you can perhaps get a little bit of a longer weekend or something like that. I think, so given the popularity of this, and given where working from home trends are going, this seems like the most reasonable choice. It does create an issue, which is that basically everybody wants to be in the office on Wednesday. So kind of density of people in the office is going to be very different on Wednesday than on Monday and Friday, if you decide to do this. Okay, so how can leaders make the most of working from home? I'd say you should try to coordinate to come in on the same days, at least at the team level. Perhaps for smaller organizations, you can do this at the company-wide level. And basically on the same days every week so that people can plan their lives around this. On those in-person days, I think it's one of the really important things is to promote in-person meetings, events, coffee, training, lunches, and actually leave for the working from home days things that require kind of either individual work or that don't really require in-person interaction. So for example, cross-office Zoom meetings. So if I work for a firm in the Melbourne office and I need to, oh crap. Sorry, can you all hear me? I think my internet might have flickered for a second.
Yes, we can all hear you.
Okay, great, thanks, sorry about that. So yeah, and if I work for a company in the Melbourne office and I need to chat with somebody in the Sydney office, this is the sort of activity that can be done on working from home days, because this is going to be on Zoom, most probably. And so I don't need to come into my physical office in Melbourne in order to in order to Zoom with somebody who's not going to be there anyway. And same thing you can do for reading, writing, data. All of these tasks that are basically individual don't require collaboration. You can do them on your working from home days. However, for new hires who basically need to get up to speed with company culture, to get to know their colleagues, to perhaps to get a little bit more mentoring in, it's probably a good idea for them to come into the office a little bit more often than the typical employee, say one more day a week. At the end of the day, you want to set things up so that you develop and maintain a company culture while still basically enjoying the benefits of working from home a couple of days a week. Okay, now here's some implications of a hybrid work office. And so here I have, I think, less data and more abstract thoughts than with the other topics. So let me talk about four things: the size of offices, the location, the design, and perhaps kind of the retail spaces around offices, where I think there will be a lot of you who are interested in that issue. So basically, at least in the US and the UK, it doesn't look like companies are planning to cut office space too much. So they're planning to cut office space by about 1%, retail space by a little bit less, and they're actually planning on increasing other types of space. And I think this has to do with, for example, the shift towards delivery-based services in the US economy, like towards Amazon and Walmart type business. In the UK, there's something similar, but still kind of the decline in office space in the UK is still less than 10%. And the reason is, or there's several reasons here, but at least one of them is scheduling. Basically, if you want people to coordinate which days you go to the office, you need to have a big enough office to accommodate everybody, or at least the full team that is in the office that day when they are in. Okay, you can't basically go and decide to reduce your office space to a small WeWork cubicle if you're doing a truly hybrid work scheme. There's also complexity. So managers are right now, I think, understandably struggling to deal with working from home now, and they see office scheduling as a two-step too far. So it's hard enough getting people into work. It's harder to tell them you only can come on certain days and certain times, and organizing kind of where people are going to sit. This is difficult. So basically, it's better to have a bigger office than a smaller office, given that. And also, there's some continuing fears over social distancing. So basically trying to cram everybody in a small space is I think, at least for the short to medium term, not going to work. So yeah, here's some more evidence on this issue about density. So we've been asking for a very long time a version of the question that is here on the left. Once the COVID-19 pandemic has ended, which of the following would best fit your views on social distancing? Would you completely return to your pre-COVID activities, substantially return, partially return, or basically not return? And it turns out we find persistently that about 10% of people say they want to continue social distancing. So there is a good amount of people out there in the workforce in the US who are afraid to be, say, in a crowded office. And so we call this long social distancing. We think this has big implications for how you use space, because it means there's going to be a large number of people who are not going to want to come in to a crowded office. And this is probably going to stick for at least a couple more years while we continue to have COVID flare-ups. However, long-run technology is going to make it easier to reduce space. So basically, we've looked at some of our members of our team at the number of patents that are related to working from home as a measure of kind of the innovations related to working from home. And you see this is what the count looks like in the 5 years or so preceding the pandemic, and how this has changed since January 2020. So since COVID became a global phenomenon, basically the number of innovations suited to working from home has done nothing but increase. So as these things make working from home more effective, more efficient, I think this is going to help people do more stuff remotely, and that might eventually lead to reductions in office space, but I'd say not for now. In terms of location, it turns out in the US, some people have left city centers. So, and in particular within metropolitan areas. So here we have New York on the left, and the Bay Area on the right. People have left the center of the city, so Manhattan and San Francisco proper, and they've actually moved out into kind of the surrounding area, and so we see this very clearly in housing prices. So sorry, these are inflows in population, but also if you look at it right here, basically the city centers were depleted in 2020. They've rebounded a little bit, but exurbs have moved, have actually gained people since the start of the pandemic. So yeah, in the long run, there's been some reshuffling of people. So perhaps having an office at the city center is not such a great idea. I don't think they're going to fully go away. And I think the reason, and perhaps many of you can tell me if this is also the case in Australia, but it sounds like firms are starting to focus on quality space more so than location. Under hybrid working from home, the idea is to have employees come in basically all on the same 2 to 3 days. And so if that's the case, you need the office to be convenient. It needs to be easy for people to get there. It needs to be kind of a comfortable place once you get there as well. And yeah, finally, I think we're going to have to redesign offices. And again, this goes with what I said about managing a hybrid workforce. If basically when people come into the office, they're doing so for the purpose of collaboration and interaction, then basically we need to design offices in order to foster that. So we need to have offices that have fewer individual office corridors, and more so meeting spaces, perhaps some lounges and places where basically people can talk and interact, which is the purpose of going to the office anyway, especially in this world of hybrid work. The big issue is that even in a world with hybrid work, there's going to be a big reduction in person days in the centers of cities. And so you see this is for a group of large cities in the US. For San Francisco, this is highest, and then for New York, and perhaps less so for some smaller cities like Houston, Boston, and Philadelphia. The issue is if you have, say, 30% fewer people, 30% less foot traffic in city centers, well, what happens to all the retail spending that these people used to do when they go out to lunch? Maybe they shop a little bit after work. well, that implies a big reduction in spending in city centers. So we're talking about kind of downtown Manhattan or midtown Manhattan and the center of San Francisco. And I think this is going to be a persistent challenge. And there's a similar challenge for transportation systems, which are going to have to cope with the same fixed costs that they had before, but say 30% fewer people on any given day. So I have maybe one or two more slides. I think I'm running a little bit over time, but I'd say working from home is good for business in other ways, in that it's offering great opportunities for startups. So since the pandemic in the US, the number of what we call high propensity business applications, so these are people registering businesses and focusing on those new businesses that have a high propensity of hiring employees, that has absolutely skyrocketed during the pandemic. Well, first it plummets during the lockdowns of 2020, but it's been persistently higher than trend since then. And so clearly working from home has created opportunities for people to build new businesses, either because now it's easier to run a business while you're working from home or working hybrid, or because there's new business opportunities related to this new post-pandemic world. But so all of it, everything is not doom and gloom. We think this is a pretty positive development. So let me conclude. I'd say in the US, working from home very much looks like it's here to stay at about 2.5 days a week for the typical office worker. There are major benefits to designing a well-organized hybrid working arrangement for your employees. This helps keep them happy. It can increase productivity. It can support diversity. It can save on space costs, even though in the short run, perhaps they're going to be higher costs from redesigning offices towards collaboration. But at the end of the day, working from home is yielding a bonanza of opportunities for new businesses, for new business lines, and potentially for startups. And yeah, so that's basically all I had to say. Again, if you're interested in our data and in the sort of work that we do, you can go to wfhresearch.com. We have a newsletter that you can sign up for, and you can look at all of our recent updates when you're there.
Well,
yeah.
Sorry, Jose. Sorry, jumping.
Yes. No. I was just going to say I'm done. I think I went a little bit over. So let's just go to the Q&A or to the next section.
No, that was fascinating. I was willing you to keep going. Actually, I was furiously taking notes. So thank you so much for that, Jose. It was really enlightening. Some of the data we are seeing, some of it I think would have been quite eye-opening for many of us here. So thank you. And I can see already we've got some questions coming in, which is wonderful. Please keep them coming in. As I mentioned before, Jose will be joined now by Jody Williams from global architecture firm Callison RTKL, and Sue Holland from PwC Australia, who is also our deputy chair here at the Committee for Sydney. Just a bit of an intro to Jody and Sue. So Jody Williams brings nearly 15 years of experience in workplace strategy, facility planning, and change management. She leads strategic planning efforts for public and private sector clients and has been featured speaker at industry events such as IFMA, World Workplace, Greenbuild, and NeoCon East. Sue Holland advises a number of PwC's largest clients, bringing them the best of the firm's people and expertise. She also leads some of PwC's most significant listed company audits. Her current and former clients are leaders in sectors as diverse as logistics, property, media, technology, retail, consumer products, financial services, and health. So we will benefit from all those insights today. Sue also serves, excuse me, on PwC's firm leadership team in Australia, and prior to her current role, she was the firm's managing partner of people and culture. So very good insights and relevant insights in that space as well for today's conversation. So Jose, I might kick off the conversation with you. Some of the headlines to the articles about the survey, provocatively say the 5-day office working week is dead. Can we also say that the idea of mandating a return to the office is also dead? That's quite a provocative thing to say, because obviously companies and policy setters within government have been flirting with this idea throughout the pandemic for good reasons, to revitalize our CBDs and have, as they see it, greater productivity at work as well. But your data seems to be suggesting that maybe if not dead, it may need to be postponed for quite a period. Would you agree with that?
So I think that's right, but to me, the longer we stay in a world where working from home is a big part of what we do, I think the harder it's going to get to force or to request people to come back to the office full time. And so actually some of the latest data that we have that didn't make it onto my presentation today is that it's actually practically hard for a lot of businesses to basically get people into the office. And so what I mean by that is when we ask people basically, are you coming into the office as many days as your employer requests, there's a good chunk of people, some 15 to 20%, who say, actually, I'm not coming in as many days. But more importantly, when we ask people, say, hypothetically, if you were to not show up at the office as many days as your employer requested, what would happen? And what's kind of fascinating there is the number one response to that is nothing, really. And I think that speaks to what we've learned over the past 2 years. For many office workers, they're very effective at doing their job remotely. So asking them to come into the office just sort of because doesn't necessarily make sense. It makes sense if they're going to come in for a big meeting to interact with their colleagues, in which case, if they don't show up, it's a big deal. But if they stay home and they're keeping up with their work, then it basically the employer is in a bit of a difficult situation, because they could discipline them, but they're disciplining them while the employee is actually doing their job perfectly adequately. So they end up not disciplining them. So this is sort of the spirit of saying, don't set bad rules, because then you'll never be able to enforce them. And I think that speaks to how hard it's going to be to basically get everybody back 5 days a week.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it aligns with our advocacy kind of position at the committee throughout the pandemic around working from home, which is that, it's, from our perspective, getting people back into the city should be done through kind of making the cities as fun and as irresistible places to be, rather than mandating a return. Considering our jobs market is so strong at the moment as well, we think that people might just choose to go somewhere else if they don't have flexible work arrangements. So Jody, that must present some challenges for us in our advocacy and our work in terms of getting people back into the CBDs. What's the impact been internationally on our CBDs, and what has that meant for the policy settings in terms of trying to think outside the box in terms of maybe outdoor dining and other kind of policy settings that would get people back in, rather than trying to kind of rely on the private sector, the employers, to do the work for the CBDs?
Yeah, it's interesting. We're seeing a lot of collaboration between the various jurisdictions, as well as landlords, and then the occupier markets, all kind of trying to work together to get people in. It's a level of collaboration that I haven't seen before, where everybody has the same goal. It might be driven by a different end goal, but they want people in the office. The landlords want it so that they're keeping tenants in the building and not having empty space. The employers want it because they want more collaboration and in person. And then of course the jurisdictions want it because the cities are, certainly central business districts, are seeing a drop in population, not just during the day, but also it's impacting the evening. And it's this whole vicious cycle of, if people are not coming into the office, they're also not going to buy lunch or get their hair cut or do their dry cleaning at the office. It's also making city streets less safe. We're a global firm, and this is just a little anecdote from what we're seeing. We have a huge office in Seattle, and people don't want to go into the office because the streets of downtown Seattle are not overly safe right now. Not saying that work from home is the cause of that, but there's definitely a correlation between fewer people in the cities and safety on the streets.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So I wonder if we could bring you in on the conversation we had earlier in the presentation about what impact this has on diversity. When we talk about for instance, the gender, the fact that in some ways, this is great for that angle. I mean, other studies show that the issues we had prior to the pandemic, that regardless of the kinds of jobs kind of men and women might do, often the house tasks often largely fall on the women. So is that exacerbate things? I mean, is it a double-edged sword when we are saying on the one hand, it is great for women and other groups in society to have working from home arrangements, but then on the other hand, it might be even harder for them to juggle their work with all the other things that they have to do?
Yeah, it's actually one of the it's actually one of the statistics that I wrote down during Jose's really interesting presentation. So maybe the first thing to say, and just to hark back to the earlier question for 30 seconds because it's relevant. So at PwC, we've had a all roles flexible policy since at least a couple of years before the pandemic. And what that means is we, like most employers on this meeting today, hire really smart people and ask them to solve difficult difficult problems for our clients. And they definitely don't need, therefore, an organisation to tell them where they're best going to work and what they need to wear to work and how they're going to work. So we've had you can work wherever you want, whatever time of the day, wearing whatever you want for some years. And the reason we put that in place is we believe a diverse workforce is going to have different views about where they work best, how they think best, how it fits in with their life. And you're going to get the best out of people. They're going to achieve their potential if they are making their own choices about how they work. So that's really relevant. And when we talk about, would you want to mandate people back to the office? We would see that as actually going back sort of pre-pandemic. We worked out that mandating people to work in any particular way, wearing any particular thing, is not the best way to run an organization. So I think there's a behavioral thing that we sort of forget in this. There's this assumption at the moment that full-time in the office was the best thing. And actually, for our organization and a number of others, had already decided that wasn't the best way to work, which leads exactly to your question on diversity. So absolutely, there is a small sliver of the population that it suits, and they have a personality preference, and maybe the position they've got in their household means that they prefer and they can manage to get up every day and be in the office by 8 and be there till 6 and come home and hopefully someone's cooked. And that's sort of a 1950s description. And I mean that's sort of an extreme end. It is better, definitely diverse populations of gender and all sorts of diversity have different lives, and the 5-day in the CBD working week works less well for them. So 100% agree, Jose, that it is hybrid working or flexible working definitely creates diversity in your working population. But the employers, in our opinion, and we've certainly done this, have to lean in more, which is you get the diversity by offering the policies, but diversity without inclusion, actually, you find yourself in this just churning washing machine of diversity. Found some diverse people, they joined because we've got great policies, and then actually they're not getting the promotions and they're not getting on the good work and they're not working with the interesting clients because disproportionately, the people who are making the decisions are from that small sliver of the population who like to be in the office. And so we absolutely observed that the people who first came into the office and still are more likely to be in the office are our older men. And I say older meaning of my own generation, so I can include myself in that, men of my age, and a lot of our younger people, but particularly our younger men. And so we found and are still finding there's lots of blokes in the office, and we've gotten a bit back to this. Are the guys taking the guys for lunch, and is that going to have an impact? So there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. We want men to mentor men and women mentor women, but we are actively leaning into how are we making sure that people who are in the office less are encouraged and enabled to come in to collaborate as many days a week as they want to, but that we are leaning on, are those people still getting the right number of opportunities? So ensuring that we're working on inclusion, so that we're getting the benefit of the fantastic diverse workforce that flexible working enables you to attract.
And just to dig a little bit deep, sorry, go on. Sorry, Jody.
Oh, I was just going to say, one of the things that we haven't talked about that I think is really interesting that we've been seeing a lot in our work is about how positive hybrid work is for neurodiverse individuals, and just being able to not only work from home, but also work flexibly during the day. So you can come in earlier or later and avoid the train where somebody might smell in such a way that's really bothersome to you, or you're too crowded or whatever. It also allows a lot more control. And kind of to Jose's point about what the future of office looks like, the offices are starting to be more like a home where you do have choice and control of where you are. If you want to be sitting somewhere soft and cozy or standing up tall, you have that hybrid ability. It's not just going to an office or going to a workstation and sitting down all day long while you're there.
It's fantastic to see these kinds of changes, which for too long have been looked at through a negative lens, I think, really empowering parts of the workforce that in the past that we haven't. I guess just to dig a bit deeper into that, Jose, I wonder the kind of the older men, as Sue put it, perhaps of less diverse backgrounds who are opting to come into the office more than the other parts of the workforce. What recommendation would you have, and what does your data show regarding the challenge of the people who are working from home in terms of getting promotions and moving up in their careers? Is there a risk they're left behind a little bit, as mothers and fathers are sometimes on maternity and paternity leave, for instance?
Yeah, so I absolutely think there's a risk there. So I should say kind of the studies from 5 or 10 years ago on working from home actually did observe differential promotion rates when you were in the group of the part of a company that was randomized into hybrid relative to the group that was randomized into being in the office full time. I think it might still be a little bit too early in our data to be able to tell whether that's still happening now. I mean, also for much of the past 2 years, most people were fully remote, or a lot of people who can work from home were fully remote. So kind of everybody was sort of on the same boat. What I can tell you is that it seems from when we ask some of our respondents, do you perceive that if you stay at home one day more than your coworkers, or one day more than your boss, they do perceive that this face time is important and that it could lead to a modest reduction in the probability of getting promoted. And so what I thought was most interesting is the people for whom this idea was most salient were actually younger. So say between 20 and 30 more so than for those but older, 30 to 40 or 40 to 50. And I think that makes total sense, because these are the people who actually, I think, are trying to learn to build their career within the organization, to get mentorship, and for whom it matters the most. I don't recall what we saw between men and women, but I think, yeah, this age gradient was really salient to us.
Can I always feel like I want to give we talk about the problem a lot. There are so many things that organizations can do to, these things are good. And if you're aware, you can do something about it. So 2 tiny examples. Most of our men now take parental leave. So we have a gender agnostic parental leave policy, and most of our men take it. And as a leader in the firm, I always ask, encourage, show the way, and so that's the first piece, is just getting our dads early into the home with their children. We think is going to have a 20-year impact on how they're going to pay that forward. And so that's the first piece. And then the second piece is you can just measure and fix these things. So we've just done our annual review of everyone's pay and salary and bonuses, and it's all very transparent, and we tell our whole organization. We also tell our whole organization what the splits of pay uplifts and bonuses and promotions are by different cohorts. So by gender, by diversity of cultural background, and also by part-time working. So our people know that the proportion of people who work part-time and got promoted is exactly the same as the proportion of people who work full-time and got promoted. So there are so many things that organizations can do to promote inclusivity. You don't have to, it's sort of, these barriers sound like barriers, but they're pretty easy to do something about if leadership is interested and engaged.
And Jody, I'm sure you would have been really interested, as we were in the part of the presentation where Jose talked about CBDs and whether that's even being challenged now. The idea of, excuse me, I'm currently working from home sick, so there you go. The fact that, you know, businesses have to increasingly think about the places that they offer to their workers, the environments that they offer. And sometimes that might mean being in the CBD in the city might not be a good outcome for their staff. First of all, what's your views about that? And secondly, what do you think we should be thinking about in terms of our response to supporting our CBDs? Should we even be challenging the notion of how do we support our CBDs? Are our cities being reshaped before our eyes forever?
They are being reshaped, but I don't think it's as dire as what people imagine it to be. What we're seeing is kind of, as Jose said, is this real flight to quality space, whether that be in a city, in an exurb, in a suburban office park. We're looking at Class A and trophy buildings being pretty highly occupied, still holding prices pretty well. It's the lower quality buildings that are falling to the side, the older buildings. There's a statistic that's been shared by Cornet that's basically 90% of our building stock will be obsolete in the next 10 years because the buildings are not smart, they don't have the amenities, and it's too expensive to change them to be something different. Certainly something we see a lot in our practice, where we're looking at what are the facilities that are in cities that used to be offices, what else can they be? Can they be changed to residential, to senior living, to hospitality? What are the ways that even a building can become mixed use within itself? We've also been doing a lot of studies on car parks. So if fewer people are commuting in on a daily basis, what do we do with all of these parking garages and lots around the cities? And how do we make those more functional and keep that feel of a full, active, vibrant city moving forward? I've been looking at some data, and while there is a move away from the center cities, we're still seeing a lot of our clients, our major corporate clients, continue to have major urban hubs, major urban offices. They may have smaller suburban places where people can visit, or they may be completely remote, but we're still seeing a lot of investment from corporates in there. And then the US government is also doing a lot of investment in bringing people into central cities, getting out of lease space into owned space. So there's a big trend tying around that. And that's something I forgot to mention. Earlier, you had asked about municipalities. One of the things that they're doing a lot in the US in particular is governments are encouraging their staff to come back into the office as a way of incentivizing the private sector to also come back. Not to say there hasn't been resistance, but it's definitely something that has helped bring people in, saying, okay, well, the government says it's okay to go in. They want their people in the office. They've taken down all of these restrictions. Now we need to do that too. And that's been a good way for a lot of the employers that we work with to say, okay, well, the government's doing it. We need to do it too. It's safe. We can do this.
Yeah, and in fact, we in the committee suggested this to government as well, to say, look, as a compromise, noting that people love working from home, perhaps you can have your public sector workers come in on Mondays and Fridays to kind of complement or supplement the what's actually happening with the private sector to support the CBDs. So that's still a work in progress. Jose, I might just see if you have a bit more data and insights on the commute, the trends in terms of people's commute to and from work. We still see, public transport numbers down here and traffic picking up quite a bit, if not more in some moments than before the pandemic. Is that what your data is showing as well?
Yeah, so I haven't looked at the commuting numbers specifically recently, but it is definitely the case that there are still large amounts of working from home, and in particular in more dense areas. So it's kind of, if you live in a small town and one of these rural states in the US, you are a lot less likely to work from home than if you work in Manhattan or in greater New York City, say. So I mean, I think that's definitely a challenge, because that also aligns with the data for what employers are planning for after the pandemic. So I absolutely think that these transportation systems are going to be in distress or stress in the near future. I think the flip side of that, and to give it a positive spin, is actually in the US, it turns out that higher income people, so the more productive people in the economy, tend to commute for longer. And so if these are also the people who are going to get to work from home more often, then we're basically saving the time that we're saving is accruing to the people whose time is most valuable. And actually a lot of the productivity gains that we estimate are coming from simply, I just save an hour of my day because I don't have to go from New Jersey down the tunnel into Manhattan. And so, I mean, I think that's the flip side of that. That has more of a macroeconomic effect, and it doesn't alleviate the pressures on the transportation systems, but it's one of the positive spins of having work from home accrue mostly to higher skilled, higher income individuals.
I wish we had time for another hour of questions. We can go so much deeper into this, but I might just fit in one last one. As one of the questions noted, your data, Jose, seems to suggest the opposite of what many people expected at the outset of the pandemic, that perhaps businesses might cut down on their office spaces and try and save some money on that end. Not only that, but it suggests that perhaps they might even have to increase, maybe, if they want to allow hybrid working arrangements and cater perhaps for staff that want to be spaced out with other staff. What implications does it have for hot desking versus having your own computer? Does this change that as well? And if anyone else wants to make some closing remarks on that would be great. So Jose, do you?
Yeah, no. So my speculation is that, I mean, not necessarily hot desking, but at least having an office where exactly where you work inside the office is flexible is probably going to be a big deal. I mean, and I think partly this will be because the days that you're in the office, you're going to be more likely to be collaborating. So you're going to be based more in a lounge type of space or in a conference room type of space than in an individual office. But I think that if you do come into the office to do individual work, I mean, we should probably get used to the idea that you're not going to have your own cubicle with your own things that nobody else moves. Hopefully, or at least I hope that in a world of hybrid work where when you come into the office, it's to collaborate, it'll make this hot desking practice, which I think is a little bit painful for most of us, and not that common. That the days that you need to do your individual work, you'll mostly stay at home.
So I'm guessing PwC has been ahead of the curve on this as well.
Yeah, so we've hot desked for a very long time, and so it is definitely more challenging in the middle of a pandemic, but we agree with your kind of general comment that there's a lot of businesses that are growing, and also we need our space. We just need it for different things. So all organizations need more or less space in different places. We particularly, just to your point, Jody, we surveyed all of our people lots of times over the pandemic. We've had all sorts of forums. Our people, 10,000 people in Australia are saying, we don't want to come into the office every day, but when we come in, we want it to be those beautiful, premium CBD buildings in a gorgeous precinct with shopping and, restaurants and great food around it. So the CBDs have an amazing place in what our people want. They just don't want to be there every day. So I think it's a positive message for CBDs, but as you said, Asan, the cities have to make the effort to build somewhere that people want to come.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Absolutely. We're 100% seeing the same trend, looking at our clients and what they're coming to us for in terms of interior design services. It's more of a shift from me space to we space, as you probably heard before, rather than an overall downsize. I mean, to Sue's point, yes, there are places that are downsizing and there are places that are growing, but it's all trending towards more of this shared space as opposed to assigned individual heads down workspace.
Great. What a positive ending to have to our conversation. It's great to see us looking at this as an opportunity and not as a problem. So thank you so much to Jose, to Sue and Jody for joining us today. And thank you for everyone else for making time in their busy day for this webinar. We look forward to seeing you next time.
Take care. Have a good day.